I've never told anyone this story. 35 years and I've never said a word. Not to my wife, not to my kids, not to the therapist I saw for a decade who thought my insomnia was about childhood trauma. It wasn't. It was about a concrete building in the Olympic backcountry and the things that walked out of the forest wearing faces that didn't belong to them. I was 19 years old. I'm 54 now, and I still check the locks 3 times before bed. I still keep a photograph in my wallet that I've never shown another living person, and I still can't drive through dense forest without my hands shaking on the wheel. How could I forget? I've tried. God knows I've tried. But some things don't fade the way memories are supposed to. Some things stay exactly as sharp as the day they happened, preserved in whatever part of your brain handles the things you were never meant to see. It was 1990, October. I was 19, broke, and sleeping in the back of a Chevy S10 with a camper shell that leaked when it rained. I dropped out of community college after 1 semester. I owed money I didn't have. I was applying to everything: dishwashing, warehouse work, seasonal labor, anything that came with a paycheck. The listing on the Federal Jobs Board said Exit Processing Officer, Olympic National Park, seasonal, remote, no experience required, housing and meals provided, $6.40 an hour, which in 1990 felt like a lifeline. I didn't know what exit processing meant. I didn't care. It came with a roof and 3 meals a day. That was enough. A woman named Devlin picked me up from the ranger station at Quinault on a Tuesday morning. She was maybe 45, short gray hair, hands that looked like they'd spent a lifetime working outdoors, and a voice that didn't waste syllables. She drove a government-issue Bronco with a cracked windshield and a radio unit bolted under the dash that looked like it belonged on a military vehicle. "You're Ellison?" "Yes, ma'am. You go by anything shorter?" "Eli's fine." She almost smiled. Not quite, but close enough that I felt something loosen in my chest. She'd brought an extra thermos of coffee and a paper bag with 2 ham sandwiches. Handed me one without asking if I was hungry. I ate it in 4 bites, and she didn't say a word about it. She just drove. I remember thinking she reminded me of my Aunt June. Same no-nonsense efficiency, same way of making you feel looked after without making a fuss about it. That comparison would haunt me later, the way I trusted her because she felt familiar, the way I mistook competence for kindness. The Olympic backcountry swallowed us slowly. The paved road ended. The gravel narrowed. The old-growth Sitka spruce closed over us until we were driving through a living tunnel. Moss hanging from everything. The air through the cracked window smelling like wet earth and centuries of undisturbed decay. Beautiful. That's what I thought at the time. Now the smell of old-growth forest makes me nauseous. We drove for nearly 2 hours. The last 30 minutes were on a road that wasn't on any map. I'd bought a gas station atlas in Quinault, and I checked. The road wasn't there. Devlin caught me looking. "No maps cover this section," she said. "Not public ones anyway. You'll get used to it." The checkpoint sat where 3 backcountry trails converged in a valley so steep and narrow it felt like standing at the bottom of a well, a single-story concrete building with a flat roof, steel shutters on every window, and a front door that looked like it belonged on a bunker. A generator hummed around back. Beyond the building, the 3 trails emerged from the tree line like dark hallways, each gated with a steel barrier and a sign reading, "Backcountry permit required. Register at checkpoint before exit." Devlin parked and handed me a laminated card, heavy, rigid, printed on both sides in small font. "Read it now," she said, "before we go inside." The card was titled, "Processing Protocols. Checkpoint 9. 1. All exiting hikers must present their backcountry permit. Cross-reference the permit number against the entry log. If the permit number does not exist in the system, do not confront the hiker. Process them normally. Flag the file. Radio base with code, yellow 3. 2. Verify the number of people in each party against the entry log. If fewer exit than entered, do not ask where the missing member is. Radio base with code, red 1. Hold the party for retrieval. 3. If more people exit than entered, process each individual, photograph them, flag every file. Radio base with code red 2. Do not inform the party of the discrepancy. 4. Photograph every exiting hiker at 4 feet distance. Compare against their entry photo on file. Minor discrepancies are expected. Sunburn, weight loss, different clothes. Note them. Major discrepancies, eye color change, missing or new scars, height variation, require code orange 5. Process and release normally. Do not confront. 5. Ask every hiker 3 questions. What trail did you enter on? What date did you begin? Who is listed as your emergency contact? If they cannot answer the 3rd question, escort them to the holding room. Radio base with code red 4. Do not explain why. 6. Between 1:45 p.m. and 2:30 p.m., no processing occurs. Lock all exterior doors. Close all shutters. If hikers arrive during this window, they wait outside. Do not communicate with anyone outside the building until 2:31 p.m. 7. If anyone exits from a closed or decommissioned trail, do not process them. Do not speak to them. Retreat to the back office, lock the interior door, observe via security camera and radio base with code black 1. Wait for the individual to leave. 8. Radio check-ins at 0800, 1200, and 1600, channel 7. Base confirms with a rotating daily code. Wrong code means compromised channel. Switch to 13 immediately. 9. Check perimeter cameras before entering or leaving the building. If a figure is visible within 50 yards that is not on the hiker schedule, do not go outside. 10. These protocols are not guidelines, they are not cautious suggestions. Every rule exists because someone, at some point, did the alternative. None of those people are available to tell you what happened. I looked up from the card. Devlin was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. At the time, I thought it was patience. Looking back, I think it was something closer to appraisal. The way you'd watch an animal walk into a pen without knowing the gate was about to close behind it. She walked me through the building, front office with a processing desk, a Polaroid camera, filing cabinets, and a logbook that went back to 1974. A waiting area with 4 plastic chairs. The holding room, small, windowless, 1 metal chair bolted to the floor, and an overhead fluorescent that buzzed like a dying insect. The back office with the observation window, a 2-way mirror that looked into the holding room, the radio set, a cot, a hot plate, and shelves of canned goods. I noticed the bathroom had no mirror, just a blank wall where one should have been. 4 screw holes in the drywall. Devlin saw me looking. "We removed it," she said. "Standard practice at all checkpoints." "Why?" She didn't answer. She showed me the camera system instead. 4 exterior feeds covering each approach and the perimeter. The footage recorded onto VHS tapes that I was supposed to label and file weekly. She showed me the generator, the fuel supply, the backup radio, the emergency lockbox with flares and a first aid kit. Before she left, she put her hand on my shoulder. Brief, firm, almost maternal. "You're going to do fine," she said. "Just follow the protocols. Don't improvise. Don't get creative. The rules are there for a reason, and the reason is that they work." She drove away. I watched the Bronco disappear up the road until the forest absorbed it. Then I was alone, in the quietest place I'd ever stood. The first week was uneventful in the way that lulls you into believing the rest will be the same. Hikers came out of the trails in small groups, sunburned and tired and smelling like campfire. I checked permits, matched photos, asked the 3 questions, Everyone answered correctly. Everyone matched their entry records. I radioed base 3 times a day, and the codes were always right. I started to relax. I started to think the protocols were just bureaucratic overcaution, liability protection, the kind of rules a government agency writes to cover itself in case something mundane goes wrong. Devlin checked in by radio every other evening. "How's the processing going? Any flags? You eating enough?" She asked about me. Not just the work. Me. Was I sleeping okay? Was the cot comfortable enough? She told me she'd put in a request for extra blankets before the cold set in. She said I was doing good work. I believed her. I want you to understand that. I believed every word out of that woman's mouth because she was the only person in 100 miles who talked to me like I mattered. On day 9, a group of 3 hikers came out of Glacier Creek Trail. 2 women and a man, late 20s, trail-worn but cheerful. I checked their permits. The entry log said 4 people had gone in. I looked at the 3 of them. They looked back at me. I followed the protocol. I didn't ask about the 4th. I radioed base with code Red 1 and told the group there was a routine paperwork delay, asked them to wait in the front area. They sat in the plastic chairs and talked among themselves. Normal conversation. Trail conditions, blisters, a black bear they'd seen from a distance. I listened through the door while I waited for the retrieval team. From the back office, I pulled the entry file. 4 names. 4 Polaroids taken at the Trailhead Permit Station 9 days earlier. 3 of the faces matched the people sitting in my waiting area. The 4th was a man with sandy hair and a wide smile, arm around one of the women in the photo. Name, Brian Cofield. Emergency contact, mother, Patricia Cofield. When the retrieval team arrived, 2 rangers I'd never seen before, no name tags, I watched them interview the group through the observation window. The 3 hikers were cooperative, friendly even. One of the rangers held up the 4th Polaroid. Brian Cofield, smiling at the camera. "Do you recognize this person?" All 3 looked at the photo, genuine confusion. "No." "Should we?" "He was listed in your party. He entered Glacier Creek with you 9 days ago." The woman who'd been standing next to Brian in the entry photo, his arm visibly around her shoulders, shook her head slowly. "It's always been the 3 of us," she said. "I don't know who that is." They took the group away. Devlin radioed that evening. "You handled that correctly," she said. "Textbook. Who was Brian Cofield?" His entry was verified. He signed in. He was photographed. He walked onto that trail with those 3 people. And now they don't remember him? Correct. What happened to him? Long pause. We don't know. We've never found anyone from a discrepancy case on the trails. No gear, no remains, no sign they were ever there past the entry point. Then who signed in? Who's in the photograph? Another pause. That's the part we can't explain. Someone entered that trail. Someone matching that description, carrying valid identification, walked through the barrier 9 days ago, but as far as those 3 hikers are concerned, that person never existed. She let the silence sit. Then she said, "Get some rest, Eli. You did good today." I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the cot and stared at the ceiling and listened to the forest and tried to convince myself there was a rational explanation for a man who existed in photographs, but not in the memories of the woman whose shoulder he'd been touching. The next 3 weeks taught me things I didn't want to learn. I processed a solo hiker whose entry photo showed brown eyes. The woman sitting in front of my camera had green eyes, not hazel, not a trick of the light. Green like sea glass, vivid and wrong. Everything else matched. Height, weight, the small scar above her left eyebrow, the chipped tooth visible when she smiled. She answered all 3 verification questions without hesitation. Her emergency contact, her mother's name, came out of her mouth as easily as breathing. I flagged the file. Code Orange 5. Processed and released per protocol. I processed a couple who entered as two and exited as two, but something was off about the man. He answered every question correctly. His photo matched, but he moved wrong. Not injured, not tired, just wrong. His gestures were a half-beat behind his words, like a dubbed foreign film. When he smiled, the expression reached his mouth before his eyes, then his eyes overcorrected and crinkled too hard. He was performing the mechanics of a smile the way someone would who'd studied smiles extensively but had never felt the impulse to produce one. His wife noticed nothing. She held his hand the whole time. She looked at him with warmth that was clearly genuine. I flagged the file, released them, watched them walk down the access road toward the pickup area, and tried not to think about what that woman was bringing home with her. Then there was the hiker I'll call Marsh. That wasn't her real name. I won't use her real name because some part of me still believes she was real, the version of her I met, and she deserves that small protection even if I'm wrong. She came out of the Elkhorn Trail on a Wednesday afternoon in late October. Solo permit, 4-day trip. She was maybe 22, small, with a backpack that was almost comically large on her frame and a bandana holding back dark hair. She looked exhausted in the way that people look when they've pushed their body hard and enjoyed every minute of it. Her permit checked out. Her photo matched. She answered all 3 questions correctly without hesitation, including her emergency contact, her older brother David. But I noticed something while I was processing her. She had a scrape on her right knee, visible through a tear in her hiking pants. Fresh, still a little raw, and she had dirt under her fingernails, ground in deep, the kind you get from scrambling over rock. These details weren't anomalies. They were the opposite. They were the most convincingly human details I'd seen in weeks. While I processed her paperwork, she talked. Not nervously, not to fill silence. She talked the way people do when they've been alone for 4 days and they're glad to see another person. She told me she'd hiked the Elkhorn to scatter her father's ashes at a lake near the headwaters. He'd taken her backpacking there when she was 12, the year before he got sick. It was the last place they'd been happy together. She wanted to bring him back. She said the lake was more beautiful than she remembered. She said she'd sat by the water for 3 hours after scattering the ashes and hadn't cried once, and that felt like the right thing. She said her brother David had wanted to come but couldn't get time off work, and that she'd promised to bring him a rock from the shore. She showed me the rock, a smooth, flat piece of granite, almost perfectly round. She held it in her palm like it was precious. I want you to understand something. In 3 weeks at that checkpoint, I had processed dozens of hikers. Some of them set off every alarm in the protocol. Wrong eye color, missing scars, party members who'd evaporated from the memory of their companions. And some of them were just people, tired and sunburned and ready to go home. Marsh felt like the most real person I'd met since Devlin had driven away. She felt human in a way that I'd started to realize I was subconsciously measuring for. I gave her a cup of coffee from my thermos before she left. Devlin's habit. I'd started doing it for hikers who seemed like they needed it. Marsh wrapped both hands around the cup and closed her eyes and said thank you in a voice so genuine it almost broke me. She left. I watched her walk down the access road. I filed her paperwork. That night I was reviewing the day's files against the entry log when I found it. Marsh's entry record, her Polaroid from the trailhead, same face, same backpack, same bandana. Brown eyes. I pulled up the Polaroid I'd taken that afternoon. The woman who'd sat across from me, who'd told me about her father, who'd shown me a rock she was carrying home for her brother. Green eyes. I sat at the desk for a long time. I don't know how long. The generator hummed outside. The forest was quiet. I'd liked her. That was the part that wouldn't stop turning over in my head. I'd liked her, and I'd given her coffee, and I'd felt something human pass between us, and the whole time I was looking at eyes that didn't match the ones she'd walked into the forest with 4 days earlier. I flagged the file. Code Orange 5. When Devlin radioed the next evening, I told her about Marsh. I gave her the details, the eye color discrepancy, the file flag. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "You processed and released? Yes. Per protocol. Good. That's exactly right." I paused. She's not human anymore, is she? Whatever came out of that trail isn't the same person who went in. Devlin was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that I've carried for 35 years. "Most of them reintegrate fine, Eli. They go home. They resume their lives. Their families don't notice, or if they notice, they rationalize. People change after time in the wilderness. That's normal enough to explain almost anything. And the ones who don't reintegrate? We monitor them." What does that mean? It means we know where they are. It means we watch. And it means that as long as they stay integrated, we leave them alone. "You're releasing them on purpose," I said. "You know they've been changed and you let them go." "We process and release per protocol," she said. "The protocol exists for a reason." "What reason?" Long pause. "Get some rest, Eli. You're doing good work." She ended the transmission. I sat in the back office and looked through the two-way mirror into the empty holding room and thought about Marsh holding that rock in her palm with her wrong-colored eyes, and I wanted to throw up. November came. The days shortened. The forest grew darker earlier. I followed the protocols with mechanical precision. I stopped connecting with the hikers. I processed them like paperwork because that's what kept me functional. Photo, permit, questions, flag, release. I stopped offering coffee. On November 14th, someone exited the South Fork Trail. The South Fork had been closed since 1986. A landslide had buried the trail under 40 feet of debris. There was no passage. The barrier had been welded shut. I was checking the perimeter cameras during the afternoon lockdown window when I saw him. A man, mid-30s, wearing hiking gear that looked brand new but dated. Bright colors, external frame pack, the kind of equipment you'd see in an old REI catalog. He walked out of the South Fork tree line, approached the checkpoint, and stood outside the front door. He didn't knock. He just stood there. I followed protocol, retreated to the back office, locked the interior door, watched on the camera. He stood motionless for over an hour, hands at his sides, face pointed directly at the camera. He didn't shift his weight, didn't blink that I could tell on the grainy monitor, didn't react to the cold or the wind or the rain that started falling midway through. At 3:47 p.m., he turned and walked back into the South Fork Trail. The welded barrier was still intact. He walked around it into the landslide debris and into the trees beyond. The camera lost him in the shadows. I radioed base. Code, Black 1. "Copy," said a voice I didn't recognize. "Not Devlin. South Fork emergence logged. Non-responsive variant. File it." I rewound the tape that night and watched the footage again. I watched it 3 times before I saw what I'd missed. The man had no shadow. Overcast day, yes. Diffused light, yes. But the trees had shadows. The barrier had a shadow. The rain left dark spots on the concrete where it hit. The man stood in the middle of all of it and cast nothing. I labeled the tape and filed it. I didn't watch it a 4th time. 3 days later, Devlin drove in unannounced. First time she'd visited in person since dropping me off. She brought supplies. Coffee, fresh batteries, new VHS tapes. She also brought a bottle of whiskey, which she set on the desk without comment. "You've been here 6 weeks, she said. That's longer than most last." Most? The average rotation at checkpoint 9 is 4 weeks. Most officers request transfer after 3. Why? She poured 2 measures of whiskey into tin cups, handed me one. "Because the processing starts to affect people," she said. "You see enough discrepancies, you start looking for them everywhere. In your own reflection, in your own responses, you start asking yourself the verification questions. What trail did I enter on? What's my emergency contact? What color are my eyes?" She looked at me. I hadn't told her about that. The fact that I'd been checking my own eyes in the back of a spoon every morning because the building had no mirrors. The fact that I'd been reciting my mother's name to myself before bed like a prayer. That's why we removed the mirrors, she said. Not because of what you might see, because of what you'd start looking for. I drank the whiskey. It was cheap and it burned, and it was the most comforting thing I'd experienced in weeks. Devlin, I said, what's on those trails? She sat down across from me. She looked tired in a way I hadn't noticed before. Not sleepy. Tired the way a structure gets tired. Load-bearing fatigue. We don't know, she said. We've known since the 70s that people go in and something different comes out. Not always. Not even most of the time. But often enough that the protocols were necessary. We've studied it. We've sent research teams. We've tried closing the trails permanently. What happened? They open themselves. We chain them. They're unchained by morning. We block them with debris. The debris is cleared overnight. We tried concrete barriers once in 1982. They were gone by sunrise, not broken, gone, no rubble, no fragments, just the bare trailhead as if nothing had ever been built. So you can't close them. No, we can only process what comes out. Monitor, track, contain where possible. Contain, I repeated. You keep using that word, but you release them. Every flagged file, every wrong eye color, every hiker who can't remember their fourth party member. You process and release. Yes, why? Because the alternative was tried, she said. In 1978, before my time, the checkpoint officer refused to release a flagged hiker, held them in the holding room overnight against protocol. By morning, 17 people exited the trails simultaneously, all from closed routes, all non-responsive. They stood around the checkpoint in a ring and didn't move for 3 days. The officer had to be evacuated by helicopter. He never worked again. She finished her whiskey. The system has an equilibrium, Eli. Things come out. We log them. We let them go. As long as we do that, the volume stays manageable, controlled. When we interfere, when we try to stop the process rather than manage it, it escalates. She stood up. I'm telling you this because you've earned it, and because I need you to keep doing your job for another 6 weeks without losing your mind. She put her hand on my shoulder again. That same brief, firm contact. You're the best officer I've had at this checkpoint in years, she said. You follow the rules. You don't improvise. That's rare. She left. I finished the whiskey alone and told myself that Devlin was the one person in this entire operation that I could trust. I was wrong, but I wouldn't know that for another 4 weeks. December 3rd, afternoon lockdown. I was in the back office with the shutters sealed when the radio crackled on an unauthorized frequency. Eli, a whisper, barely audible through the static. Eli, it's Marsh. I didn't touch the radio. I know you remember me. The girl with the rock, my dad's ashes at the lake. You gave me coffee. I sat very still. I need to tell you something, Eli, about Devlin, about the protocols, about what they're really for. I reached for the radio. I don't know why. Something about her voice. Not the words, the texture of it. It sounded like the real Marsh, the one with brown eyes, the one who went into the forest and never came out. I pulled my hand back. She knew, Eli, Devlin. She knew about me before I ever walked out of that trail. She knew I'd been changed. She told you to process and release because that's what the system requires, but she didn't tell you why. Silence. Static. The protocols aren't protection, Eli. They're processing. You're not screening threats. You're facilitating transfer. Every hiker you flag and release walks into the world carrying a piece of what lives on those trails. The flags don't trigger containment. They trigger tracking. Devlin knows exactly where every one of them goes. She's not containing anything. She's distributing it. The radio went dead. I sat in the back office for a long time after lockdown ended. I thought about Marsh's green eyes and the woman with her wrong-colored irises and the man from the closed trail who cast no shadow. I thought about the 3 hikers who couldn't remember Brian Cofield. I thought about every file I'd flagged and released over 6 weeks. I thought about Devlin's hand on my shoulder. I pulled the filing cabinet open and went through every record from my rotation, every flag, every code, every discrepancy. 43 flagged files in 6 weeks. 43 hikers I had processed, photographed, and released into the world knowing something was wrong with them. Then I opened the cabinet's bottom drawer, the one with historical records from before my assignment. I went back through the logs, years of them, thousands of entries, and I found a pattern that made my stomach drop. Every flagged hiker, every single one going back to 1974, had been released. Not one had ever been held for retrieval. Not one had ever been turned away. Code Orange 5 didn't trigger containment. It triggered cataloging. The flags weren't warnings, they were inventory tags. I kept digging. Near the bottom of the drawer, beneath years of files, I found a water-stained folder labeled Personnel, Checkpoint 9. Inside were the records of every officer who'd ever worked this post. My file was on top. Standard paperwork, application, ID photocopy, assignment letter, and clipped to the front, a Polaroid. Me, standing at a trailhead, wearing a day pack, smiling. The photo was dated September 12, 1990, 3 weeks before Devlin picked me up in Quinault. I had never been to Olympic National Park before October. I turned the Polaroid over. On the back, in handwriting I recognized because it was my own, were 4 words. He's ready. Send him. I put the photo in my wallet. I closed the drawer. I sat down at the radio and stared at it for a long time. I thought about calling Devlin, confronting her, demanding an explanation. Instead, I thought about what she'd told me, the equilibrium, the system, the things that open themselves no matter how many times you chain them shut. I thought about the man with the smile that reached his mouth before his eyes. I thought about his wife holding his hand, not noticing. I thought about Marcia's brother David, waiting at home for a rock from a lake where his sister scattered their father's ashes, not knowing that whatever brought him that rock wasn't his sister anymore. I thought about myself, 19 years old, sleeping in a truck, desperate enough to take any job with a roof, the perfect candidate. No connections, no one checking on me, no one who would notice if what drove out of this valley in December wasn't quite the same thing that drove in during October. I checked my eyes in the back of a spoon. Brown. They'd always been brown, I was almost sure. Devlin came for me on December 19th. She brought my replacement, a kid named Garza who looked exactly the way I must have looked 10 weeks earlier. Hungry, uncertain, ready to be useful. I trained him for 3 days. I showed him the protocols. I walked him through the cameras, the radio, the filing system. I did not show him the bottom drawer. On my last night, Garza asked me the same question everyone asks. Is it real? Yes, I said. All of it. What are they? The things on the trails? I don't know. Follow the protocols. That's the only thing that matters. He nodded. I could tell he didn't fully believe me. That was fine. He'd believe by the end of his first week. They always did. Devlin drove me out. We didn't speak for the first hour. The forest thinned. The road widened. The sky appeared. Then she said, "You found the photo." It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. "And you still came to work every day. You still processed. You still followed the rules." "Yes." She nodded slowly. "That's why we chose you, Eli. Not because you were desperate, because you're compliant, even when compliance stops making sense, even when you know the system is using you. You follow the rules because the alternative is worse. That's the rarest quality there is." I stared at the road ahead. The trees blurred past. "What am I?" I asked. She was quiet for a long time. "You're Eli Ellison," she said. "You're 19 years old. You're going to go home and get a job and build a life, and you're going to be fine." "That's not what I asked." "I know," she said. but it's the only answer that helps you. She dropped me at the bus station in Quinault. She handed me an envelope with my final paycheck. She put her hand on my shoulder one last time. Don't come back, she said. Don't research this. Don't look for others. Live your life. The further you get from those trails, the less it matters what walked out of them. I took the bus home. I got a job. I built a life. I did everything she told me to do. It's been 35 years now. I have a wife, 2 grown kids, a house with good locks and no mirrors in the bathroom. I sleep most nights. I don't hear things in the forest because I don't go near forests. I've kept my distance. I've followed the rules. Even out here, even decades later, I follow the rules. But I still have the photograph in my wallet. I take it out sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and my wife is asleep and I can sit alone with the thing I've never told anyone. I look at my own face in that Polaroid, smiling at a trailhead I don't remember visiting. 3 weeks before I supposedly arrived for the first time, and I turn it over and read the words in my own handwriting. He's ready. Send him. And I wonder which time was the first time, and whether the man who walked onto that trail in September ever walked back out, and whether the thing that showed up at the Quinault Ranger Station in October, broke and hungry and desperate enough to take any job with a roof, was really him, was really me. I check my eyes in the bathroom mirror every morning. Brown. They've always been brown. I'm almost sure.